With the Mario Brothers and plumbing's a game.
Oscar Isaac is in talks to take on the role of our Moon Knight in Disney Plus's upcoming live-action series. And while I think that's a great casting choice, I'm still highly skeptical. Not because of Isaac, I think he'd do a good job with whatever material he's handed if he got cast. The MCU has very rarely miscast any of their leading roles. But more often than not, the big problems start in the writing phase, with good performances being hampered by messy scripts. And I know how Moon Knight is a tricky character to sell to a mainstream audience, which is precisely why his books have never been extraordinarily successful. Just barely successful enough that he keeps on coming back around every few years to continue to be absolutely nutty and scary, much like Deadpool was before he caught the spotlight and had to be watered down so as not to put off new audiences. But you know what's really nutty? I've got a secret to tell you. Come on, don't be shy, come here. Closer. Closer. This video is sponsored by Raid Shadow Legends! In case you haven't watched a YouTube video in the past 2 years, Raid Shadow Legends is the hit dark fantasy RPG that's available on mobile and PC if you got one of those. Lord knows I don't, but it looks and plays just as well on mobile, and you can pull it up and play anytime while you're stuck at home all day or on your break at work. With 500 champions to collect, each with their own special skill, and a million artifacts to find and equip, no two champions will ever be the same, giving you trillions of combinations of teams. Trillions, with a T! My favorite part of the game is that you can summon champions to help you in battle, upgrade skills, and depending on the level of upgrade, it gives you uncommon, common, and rare champions, so you won't have to use all your shards to summon them. And this month, Raid's getting their biggest update ever. The main event is already here, the Doom Tower. It's a giant tower with 120 floors, a bunch of secret challenge rooms, and 12 badass bosses to take on if you're up to the challenge. And to help you get started, Raid is giving away a special champion, a fellow by the name of Bulwark, who's awesome in Clan Boss and even better for helping you take on the Doom Tower bosses. If you want to get a huge head start in Raid, all you have to do is hit the link in the description and get your free Void Champion, an XP booster, 50 gems, some energy refills, and even an ancient shard as soon as you get in game. You'll even find your extra rewards here in your inbox for the next 30 days only. And it's that easy. Just click the link in the description and I'll see you in the game. I can't help but remember how major aspects of that character, like his extreme memory problems, suicidal depression, antisocial and psychotic tendencies, and the fact that he kidnapped an old lady and made her a slave for years and locked her in a torture room and killed anyone who tried to help her escape, all that shit was cut or simplified. Now she's just his wisecracking roommate and it's all fun and safe and marketable. As soon as Moon Knight got the green light for a series, I wanted to be excited, but instead I got nervous. I remembered what happened to Deadpool and envisioned a very lackluster show that changes or misrepresents the character so much that it damages him for years to come. I know for a fact that it's going to be watered down to fit on a Disney platform, but it's just a question of how much. Today I'm here to give my thoughts on what needs to be done to stop that from happening, and preserve what is in my opinion, one of the better characters in Cape Comics. Let's get the basics out of the way. I'll start small and work my way up. Who exactly is Moon Knight? No, he's not just Marvel's Batman. That's an extreme oversimplification that people use to sell him to other people who don't read comics. People like Batman even if they don't read or care about comic books, so it's a safe bet that if you just compare him to that, you'll get a lot more casual readers to like him by default. I know why it's said, and it's probably done with good intentions, but it's a very surface level comparison. They're both rich guys with capes and they throw sharp pointy things that look like their costume logo, but that is about as apt as saying Sentry is Marvel's Superman. They look similar, and their costumes and powers/gimmicks are similar, but that's where the comparison begins and ends. At most, Moon Knight is more like Ben Affleck Batman mixed with Travis Bickle. He brands criminals by carving a moon logo into their foreheads so they'll be killed in prison, which Batman vs. Superman ripped off. But he also does things like crash a helicopter into Taskmaster to avoid fighting him, reenact the raid single-handedly, become a Hollywood movie producer, tackle his nemesis off a rooftop and cut off his face and keep it as a trophy in a box under his floorboards, and sometimes puts it on and wears it in the mirror, talk to voices in his head in public and punch himself in the face, has dissociative identity disorder and switches jobs every time he turns into one of his alters, becomes a detective that fights supernatural demons and ghosts, sacrifices people to a scary Egyptian deity that may or may not be possessing his body, and sometimes hunts werewolves. He's got a lot going on. And because all of this sounds weird and out there and hard to sell, the show faces a lot of hurdles, and I worry they'll take the easiest route possible by using none of this. Which leads to our first major point. Why does it matter that they get the show right? A lot of people from the outside looking in probably think, does it matter if the show is perfect? Because the books are still there and still great, right? Well, half right. The old books are still there, but all the future ones are now imperiled. Marvel Comics has proven time and again that brand synergy is their king, and they will throw out and rebuild everything to make it as accessible to casual fans as possible. They want fresh new fans who like the movies to go pick up the comic and get the same experience. Relatively. That means that any comic that differs from the movies and TV shows suddenly gets warped to match them. A classic example is Star-Lord, who looked like this for decades, but then the movie comes out and invents this redesign for him. And going forward, now suddenly the character is written completely differently to match Chris Pratt, and he's got the exact same costume. There's a Falcon and Winter Soldier comic coming out to match the series. They started drawing Punisher's face to look like Jon Bernthal. The Defenders team lineup looked like this, and then the TV show came out and suddenly the team roster looked like this. Iron Man was a little more stoic and serious. Then he's Robert Downey Jr. and is very sarcastic and quippy, and now in the comics he's bantering as much as Spider-Man. Deadpool started talking more like Ryan Reynolds' very hit-or-miss on-set ad-libs. Or suddenly he's hanging out with Negasonic Teenage Warhead, a character he's never met before in pretty much any of his comics. And now she's a sidekick for all of his 2018 run, and in Deadpool Mercs for Money we have a whole story devoted to explaining how her head got shaved to look more like the actress. The only character that's relatively immune is Spider-Man, save for being drawn to look more like Andrew Garfield for a little bit. But that character faced the wrath of Synergy in all of his Elseworld books. Like the Spidey series, where he's drawn to look like Tom Holland, fights Vulture with Iron Man, and meets Michelle Jones and Genki/Ned. Or even further back, that awkward situation where he started dating Gwen Stacy in the Ultimate Universe even though they considered each other like siblings and also lived in the same house together, so you know they just had to have done it at some point when May was out getting groceries or something. All likely because the book came out just a few years before, you guessed it. Whatever happens to Moon Knight in this series will undoubtedly change the comics, so if they screw it up royally and or do something way off base, fans of the character suffer for it for the foreseeable future. It's not often that these changes are permanent, but a few of them tend to stick forever if they make an easy way to sell the book. Deadpool more or less has gone back to normal now and stopped trying to emulate his film counterpart. Punisher's face reverted to his original vengeful scowl, but Iron Man, Spider-Man Noir, and the Avengers, and a pretty substantial chunk of the cosmic half of the Marvel Universe all showed no signs of going back to the way things were. And whether that's a good or bad thing is entirely subjective, but I think it's a cheap way to make these stories more accessible. In my opinion, the best way to get new readers wasn't to keep rebooting the characters into endless cycles of repeating their old storylines because those are now getting an expensive new movie, or to force readers to keep picking up massive crossover events to understand what's happening to the only one character they actually want to read. It wasn't any of that, it was just to keep telling cool, original stories with the characters you have that take them to new places and try new things. The bigger these characters have gotten, the less they've been able to branch out and evolve. And that sucks because Moon Knight's obscurity is one of the character's strengths. No two Moon Knight runs are exactly alike, and the fact that his audience is so small and expectations are so low means that writers can do just about whatever they want with him. Keep in mind, I'm not making this video because I think interpreting Moon Knight in a new way is inherently wrong. The books have shown us many different sides of him, but I want them to find a way to pay homage to all of these different runs and versions of him, instead of tossing all of that out and just trying to start something that resembles none of them. Moon Knight as a character is partly so interesting because he's always changing, and I don't want that to go away. I don't hate change, I hate bad change. Remember that video I did on Lizard Syndrome and how a lot of characters are stuck spinning their wheels with repetitive character arcs forever? Moon Knight is an exception. The status quo changes for him in every new run. From Doug Moench's serialized pulp adventure story, the dark political drama of the Houston run, to the mind-bending surrealist character study of Jeff Lemire's book, to Warren Ellis's episodic noir detective series with sprinkles of mysticism. All Moon Knight runs focus on different aspects of the character and use him in different ways. Not all of them worked for me, but I applaud them for keeping with the theme of trying something new. All of that will change if the Disney Plus show is a smash hit success. Whatever the show ends up being, the character will follow for better or for worse. It's what happens to every obscure Marvel character who becomes a big deal through a movie or series, at least in some capacity. So whatever inevitable changes they make, I want them to be for the right reasons, and not just change for the sake of making something that will sell. It's not so much a problem that he'll resemble the show version, but more that he'll only be like that for a very long time, and we won't get to see any fresh new takes on him. All of that variation and all of these new directions snuffed out. They'll just take whatever the show was, regardless if it works, and make that his permanent, repetitive, default state. There are a few pitfalls this show needs to avoid to both work as a halfway decent superhero adaptation, but also not fucking destroy Moon Knight for like 10 years until eventually everyone forgets the show exists and his book starts selling like shit again and the writers are allowed creative freedom because they know it'll just get canceled after 12 issues like the good old days. Don't make the same mistakes Netflix did. As much as we all loved 1.56, 3/12 of the Netflix Marvel properties, they definitely had some issues. Something to keep in mind, though, is this isn't Netflix. They're produced by Kevin Feige and not Jeff Loeb. Given that it's Kevin's gig now, there's a whole different set of creative sensibilities and an opportunity for a brand new approach. But some part of me believes there's a subtle expectation to follow along with the example of all these previous Marvel series, since that's what we all know. Anytime I've heard someone talk about Moon Knight getting adapted, they used to say, make it like Netflix. But really they mean make it like Daredevil, because the rest of these are not nearly in Daredevil's league. Sure, parts of them are pretty cool and memorable, but overall, they all did one thing or another to rub me the wrong way. The immediate ones that come to mind are filler episodes and seasons that are too long, and trying to make the villain too human and down to earth, just to kill them off for shock value after they don't fucking do anything all season. Netflix's 13-episode format hurt just about every project they did for Marvel. Every season has at least one episode where fuck all happens, and it's just there to fill the time gap. Daredevil Season 1 used this to its advantage and had that be an episode to build up its characters a little more and show us some flashbacks to strengthen Matt Murdock and Foggy Nelson's friendship, which was a cornerstone of that series. The other shows followed suit by always having an episode where the hero gets seriously injured and needs to rest up for a while a bunch of flashbacks play. Or just lounge around sad for a whole hour because they think the villain has won and they don't know what to do. That's fine for one episode a season, but as these shows went on, more and more of each season was just episodes like this. The pacing of these shows was abysmal, and they could have easily cut out about 5 hours of content from most of these, with nothing of value being lost. And speaking of that pacing problem, let's spend a ton of time developing and humanizing a villain, and their struggles and motivations, and their goals and their trauma, and then blow their brains out, and push them out a window, or kill them with a sword because, ooh, these shows are dark and edgy. Imagine Moon Knight gets a 13-episode season where he spends episodes 5 through 9 just walking around Long Island out of costume and crying because Frenchie got mad at him and doesn't want to pilot his mooncopter anymore. While several flashbacks are sprinkled in about how Bushman got his skull face tattoo just so he can get shot in an unrelated drive-by in episode 11 to show how dark and gritty and serious this show is. Thankfully, I have high hopes that the pacing will be a little bit tighter knit with this show based on what else Disney Plus is doing so far. The episode count for both Falcon and the Winter Soldier and WandaVision are both 6 episodes each. Most likely to have something a little more high budget and quickly paced, so I'm optimistic that Moon Knight won't drag on as much. But there's a chance they'll give him more episodes per season because of all of these characters, he's probably the one that costs the least in visual effects for. He doesn't have telekinesis, he's not a ghostly android or a flying man or a guy with a robot arm who can lift cars. He's just a guy in a suit. We'll have to wait and see how long they take to tell his first story arc. Don't have Spectre and all of his villains out of costume for 7 out of 8 episodes a season. Netflix Marvel was so fucking terrified of being laughed at that they went out of their way to use costumes as little as possible to legitimize the stories. But it was transparent and cowardly. And worse yet, when they did use their costumes, it was sparingly and tied to the character's arc or state of mind. Matt Murdock has to spend 13 episodes earning his horns. While it was nice to see him keeping them for a season, he gets all depressed and swears it off for the majority of Defenders. Then when he's motivated to don the suit again, he wears it for only a handful of that series, only to get depressed and lose it all over again. This time for good. Likewise, Frank Castle has to be nudged, convinced, prodded, coerced, taunted, and persuaded to put on his skull vest, Just so he can do that tired old secret agent thing where he's like, I'm putting that life behind me now. Now I just want to have a beard and date small town single moms. But they keep pulling me back in. So he can put it on for a little bit more, then lose it again. This obnoxious fucking back and forth routine got old real fast, and I'd hate to see Mark Spector hanging up his costume and quitting for good anytime he has an argument with his girlfriend or his goddamn spaghetti is overcooked, or whatever other reason these baby-ass serious superheroes have for throwing out their suit every chance they get. Just have him put it on in the first episode and keep it. It's a cool suit and it would look really nice on camera in the right lighting. The other Netflix heroes had it even worse with their costumes, to the point that even the tiniest breadcrumb of an acknowledgement felt like a drop of water to a man dying of thirst in the desert. You know how rare it was that Luke Cage even wore a yellow t-shirt? It's a fucking shirt! Why was that so hard? It's like the most basic and easy costume ever, and they were still afraid to use it more than they had to, so he's always wearing a hoodie or something else without a hint of the color yellow on it. I don't even want to talk about that bullshit with Iron Fist's mask. After all these hints and nods, he finally puts it on in Season 2 to fight crime, and he had the damn thing upside down. If Moon Knight follows this pattern, the best we get is him parkouring around rooftops at night in black jeans, combat boots, and a white hoodie, as like a cute little wink and nod to the fans. And then he'd wear the costume in full for one episode, and then ditch it when he's sad about stubbing his toe. Ah, Jesus. My Stephen Grant personality has racked up a lot of income tax this year, and I don't feel like driving across town to meet my accountant, and he's not taking remote meetings right now. Time to hang up the suit for good. I quit. I can't keep doing this life, Marlene! And please, for the love of God, don't do that tired joke that every quote-unquote serious Marvel adaptation does, where the character picks up a comic book and then dismissively says, "This is bullshit garbage for kids!" Or puts on a comic-accurate costume and then says it's ridiculous while looking directly in the camera. Every fucking one does that. I hate it.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Not in a million years.
You gotta be kidding me.
Hell no. This is it. This is the one.
Tell me you're kidding.
Superheroes wear costumes.
You look like a damn fool.
You know they're all bullshit, right? Maybe a quarter of it happened, and not like this.
Maybe comic books would sell more if these mainstream properties stopped wiping their ass with them to seem more cool. Just a thought. But to end this topic on some hope, I think that with this being more in the realm of the MCU instead of a weird non-canon but trying to be canon side project bubble, there will be less shame in the costume designs than the serious heroes on a serious Earth. The mainline MCU design philosophy hasn't substantially let us down so far, and they've managed to give Spider-Man, Captain America, Iron Man, and most other characters a decent and memorable live-action look that they keep on. The inevitable unmasking every 12 seconds for the actor to have more face time during the emotional scenes is a virtual certainty, but hopefully he'll keep on the rest of the outfit. As an aside, however, don't start with the Mr. Knight suit because it might be easier to take seriously. This suit holds a substantial story significance for the character and represents his growth into a more respectable crime fighter after being a walking disaster for a few years. To have him start in this suit would be like having Spider-Man's black costume in the first movie, or having Bruce Banner immediately turn into Professor Hulk with no in-between. Save that for like Season 3. And lastly, know what to keep and what to cut. I'm not the type of guy who thinks you should use all comic books as your script and storyboard, and any deviations are a bastardization. Sometimes comic books suck and you should change them. Really all I care about is getting the character's tone and the spirit of the book right. I only get irritated when I feel like that hasn't been captured properly, which is why all of the hyper-dark murdering Batman, lighthearted Deadpool, conflicted Punisher, and brain-dead Red Hood to Arkham Knight translations, those are the ones that bug me. I don't give a shit when you change something like giving Doc Ock a wife in his backstory, or making Mysterio a scientist, or aging up Cap's sidekick Bucky, or having Deadpool's girlfriend not be a shape-shifting mutant assassin. These are changes that make sense for simplifying a long-running story into something that works in a 2-hour format, or services the emotional core of the story they want to tell. And ultimately, with changes like these, the character is still preserved and feels how they did in the books. So what do you preserve with Loony Moony, and what do you simplify? Well, the character has a very rich and varied history with a lot of unique stories and interpretations to build upon. Ideally, the TV Moon Knight would feel like a perfect hodgepodge of all of the best parts of him from the comics, with none of the weaker aspects. So what aspects would make for building a better Moon Knight? Let's break it down. There's a reason people in-universe call him Loony Moony. The guy is nuts and completely unpredictable. He's so out of his mind and dangerous, yet always feels so in control of that, even when he's not. He's like a standing explosion. Generally, make sure he's always got some crazy card up his sleeve. Some of the best stories pay off with him beating the villain in a super unexpected way that only a complete madman could come up with. Taskmaster is the greatest hand-to-hand combatant you've ever faced? Then don't fight him hand-to-hand. Just crash a helicopter into him and skip the whole fight. You beat him in one move. Find yourself in a no-win scenario hostage situation where a gunman is about to shoot a little girl? Then threaten him so nihilistically and scare the shit out of him until he lets his guard down and then smash him. Moon Knight always has a creative solution. He doesn't get depressed and mope around or rack his brain trying to solve a problem in an overly complex way. He just acts on instinct, and whatever insane thing comes to mind first is usually what works. His DID is an interesting character trait that can be used to explore Oscar Isaac's range as an actor, because Mark Spector, Stephen Grant, and Jake Lockley are all essentially different people who share one body and face. Having him battle internally to get all of his alters on the same page can be a really cool recurring source of conflict. There's a storyline where one of his alters gets back together with his ex-girlfriend without him knowing, and then the two of them argue inside of his mind over it. Jake is a tough, uncomplicated, no-nonsense guy that's charming, sociable, talkative, and dangerous when he needs to be. Steven is a pragmatic, calm, and mostly a pacifist who lets other people do the fighting for him. Mark Spector is a train wreck of a human being who has a hard time playing well with others, struggles with PTSD, and can be his own worst enemy. But the best parts of all of them come together to make Moon Knight an unstoppable force. And even though he uses it to his advantage, his mental illness is also a liability too. It makes him a hard man to be around or to love. His friends and loved ones either get caught in the crossfire of his obsessive war on crime, or just find themselves disturbed by his behavior because he's pretty sick. A commonality with a lot of great Moon Knight stories is the uphill battle of mental illness and the war within himself, trying to accept that he's sick, but also learn to be a better person in spite of his internal problems, and finding inner peace with his issues. Let's not forget a crucial part of what drove Moon Knight to become a costume vigilante in the first place. Perhaps his greatest internal struggle: his attachment to the Egyptian god of the moon, Khonshu. In his origin story, Mark Spector is a mercenary who was left to die in Egypt for standing up to his war criminal boss, but his body was placed in front of a statue of Khonshu, and he was mysteriously resurrected. Now he believes Khonshu guides him to protect people in the night and punish criminals as offerings to his new deity. Over the years, he's had a very complicated relationship with Khonshu, both seeing him as a loving father figure that puts him on the right path, and as an abusive demon that bullies him into doing the wrong thing. It really depends on the interpretation of that writer at the time. I think the mystical elements of Moon Knight work best when you keep them ambiguous. Many writers over the years have chosen to have Khonshu be sort of a mystery. Is it flat out real magic? Is it an alternate personality that just manifested itself to appear as a god and force Mark to do bad things for what he believes are a good reason? Is it some kind of mix where it's an alternate personality that was given magic power over him and became real? It's a little of all of these, and none of these. And that's what's interesting about it. Keep it vague and let us speculate. Have some evidence that it's real magic. Have some evidence that it's all in his head. And of course, use this angle to create some really trippy, surreal sequences where the visuals can go all out. Whether he's in a Doctor Strange-like magic portal to another dimension, or just imagining one in his twisted mindscape, you can create some really special visuals for this show. And lastly, don't be ashamed of his villains. They're all even more obscure than he is, and they tend to have a problem with longevity because he kills them so quickly sometimes. But you can develop them to be pretty scary and interesting. Just make them more dangerous and cunning so they survive his wrath a little longer. Black Spectre, Midnight, Bushman, who definitely needs a scarier name to match the character, cause goddamn. Sun King, The Secret Empire, Midnight Man are just a few that I can name that are pretty cool. Bushman is a mercenary warlord who destroys African communities looking for treasure. Midnight Man is a clever art thief. Midnight is that guy's son who becomes Moon Knight's sidekick, only to be turned into a murderous cyborg after being killed by the Secret Empire. Moon Knight did the Red Hood Winter Soldier thing before anyone else. Embrace some of the wilder aspects of these characters instead of making them normal people who just share the name and then get killed off unceremoniously. If there's anything I think can hit the cutting room floor, it's all the werewolf connections, or the time he got moon-based superpowers, or the stories where his villains are magically revived from the dead when he gutted them years before. I'd also recommend doing some better character building for Marlene because she can be pretty flat as a love interest. And Mark's best friend Jean-Paul feels awkwardly utilized as the years go on, where they can't decide what to do with him being gay and whether or not he hates Mark. Come up with something new for those guys and make them work, because all the basics are there. I'd also like to touch on the fact that yes, this character might fit better in an R-rated setting, but it's a Disney show, so we're not getting that. The best we'll get is about the level of violence in The Mandalorian, where the goriest stuff is implied off-screen, like that guy who got cut in half by the door, which I'm fine with. Aw shit, wait, Moon Knight's best friend is gay. Sorry, Jean-Paul, Disney won't allow that. On to Hulu you go. As much as I bring it up because I find it fascinatingly demented, the face-stealing psycho shit isn't crucial to the character and was a bit ghoulish. I just think it's important to remember that Moon Knight is a character that is frighteningly unhinged and can go to some extremes if left unchecked. You know how the media says Spider-Man is a dangerous menace to society? Well, Moon Knight is actually a dangerous menace to society on his worst day, but a guy who can do a lot of good on his best day. He goes to some very strange and indescribable places both externally and internally in his quest to do the right thing, whether that be for an abusive deity that may or may not exist, or just to help himself learn to be a better guy in spite of his mental illness. If they can capture that character right, then I think Moon Knight's comics still have a shot at being pretty damn good going forward. I'd certainly be pleasantly surprised. Translating something weird and niche into something mainstream is never an easy process, and we've certainly seen plenty of examples of how not to do it. Just look at most video game movies. But in the realm of comics to movies, the MCU has had a very mixed record. On one end of the spectrum, a complete nobody team like the Guardians of the Galaxy was given a fresh new attitude and tone that made them lovable and memorable. While on the other end, a character like Iron Fist had most of his mysticism and fantasy elements stripped away to function as a down-to-earth crime drama about corporate politics with occasional ninjas. One captures the spirit of a team of misfits in space becoming a family and fighting evil, while the other fails to represent its hero's world and powers in a satisfying way to work on a TV budget. Sometimes a change may work to save money or keep the story from seeming too weird, but that change doesn't always work for making the story more interesting. You don't need to create a shot-for-shot remake of the comics to adapt them properly, you just need to know what the story and characters are all about on a thematic and emotional level, and what they mean to people. As long as that's the same, all these minute details don't really matter. And in the end, as crazy as all of this sounds, I think if you do it just right, a big audience would come to enjoy what this character has to offer. Because Moon Knight isn't quite like anyone. He's one of a kind. And I hope he stays that way.